I travelled to Somaliland, an African country in the Horn of Africa, to witness its Independence Day. In its capital, Hargeisa, the streets overflowed with flags, pride and a fierce sense of identity. But there's one small catch. Somaliland technically does not exist. Despite having its own government, army, currency and democratic elections, Somaliland is officially part of Somalia. So why does a functioning peaceful state remain unrecognized? And more importantly, why should the world recognize it?
Bombings, piracy, civil war, Black Hawk Down and Ilhan Omar. Those are the things Somalis are famous for. But this isn't Somalia. I am standing in Hargeisa, Somaliland, and it's one of the most incredible countries I've ever visited. It's not recognized by any country in the world except for Taiwan, but it potentially has a very bright future.
Somaliland was once known as British Somaliland, a protectorate established in the late 19th century during the height of European colonization in Africa. Across the border, the Italians controlled southern Somalia, forming what became known as Italian Somaliland. These two territories, though both Somalian culture and language, were shaped by different colonial powers, legal systems and political institutions. On June 26, 1960, British Somaliland gained independence. For 5 brief days, it existed as a sovereign state, recognized by over 30 countries, including the UK and the US. But its independence was short-lived. Driven by a pan-Somali nationalist dream of uniting all Somali people under one flag, Somaliland voluntarily joined with Italian Somaliland on July 1st, 1960 to form the Somali Republic.
The present Somali nation was created in 1960 by merging two former colonies, Italian Somalia and British Somaliland.
The union, however, was flawed from the beginning. The merger was rushed, with no formal legal act of union ratified by both sides. The northern Somalilanders quickly felt marginalized, underrepresented in government, economically neglected, and politically sidelined. Tensions grew throughout the 1970s under the increasingly authoritarian regime of Siad Barre. His rule became synonymous with brutality, especially in the north. In Somaliland, opposition to Barre's rule coalesced into the Somali National Movement, SNM, largely supported by members of the Isaaq clan, the majority clan in British Somaliland. The government's response was brutal. In the late 1980s, Siad Barre launched a systematic campaign of extermination against the Isaaq population. What followed became known as the Isaaq Genocide, one of the most horrific yet completely overlooked atrocities in modern African history. Somali government forces bombed the city of Hargeisa, killing an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 civilians, most of them Isaaq. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. Mass graves still dot the outskirts of the city. This wasn't war, it was ethnic cleansing carried out with Soviet-made weapons and a scorched earth policy. When Barre's regime finally collapsed in 1991, Somalia descended into complete chaos and civil war. But in the north, Somalilanders gathered to reclaim their independence. They declared the re-establishment of the Republic of Somaliland within its 1960 borders. They held reconciliation conferences, drafted a new constitution, and began building democratic institutions. Yet despite ticking all the boxes of statehood, a defined territory, a permanent population, an effective government, and a capacity for international relations, the world turned away. Somaliland's independence has never been recognized, and tragically, the genocide that helped drive that independence has never been formally acknowledged. Somaliland has maintained peace for over 3 decades. No small feat in a region that is literally famous for conflict and extremism. It has its own military and police force. It provides basic services, collects taxes, and controls its borders. Elections are not only held, they are actually quite competitive. Voter registration uses biometric tech. Opposition parties regularly win. There have been several peaceful transfers of power. Why do I bring that up? Because Somaliland is truly the exception in that region of the world. So Somaliland isn't trying to break away, it's trying to return to what it was and what it already had. It started as a standalone country which chose unity with Italian Somalia. And when that union failed, it decided to go its own way and rebuild itself. What more can a people do to prove they are a nation? Despite lacking formal recognition, countries and companies are engaging with Somaliland, quietly so but very strategically. The most visible example is in the port city of Berbera, on the Gulf of Aden, a key maritime choke point connecting the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. In 2016, Somaliland signed a $442 million deal with DP World, the Dubai-based global port operator, to modernize and expand the port. This investment has transformed Berbera into a regional trade and logistics hub with a newly built container terminal, heavy-duty cranes and a 19-meter deep berth capable of docking large cargo ships. The port is already drawing trade from Ethiopia, a landlocked nation of over 120 million people.
Berbera port is the most famous port in the Red Sea.
A new highway corridor co-financed by the UAE is under construction to connect Berbera to Addis Ababa. The UAE sees Somaliland as a strategic counterweight to Chinese and Turkish influence in the Horn of Africa. And so does Taiwan.
China is leveraging Somalia against the pro-US, pro-Israel, pro-West Somaliland because of Somaliland's relationship with Taiwan.
In 2020, Taiwan opened a de facto embassy in Hargeisa, one of the few governments to openly recognize Somaliland as a diplomatic partner. Somaliland responded in kind, opening a representative office in Taipei.
Officials on Wednesday unveiled the plaque for Somaliland's representative office in Taiwan.
The two unrecognized states have since deepened cooperation in education, agriculture, digital development, and healthcare. And now, even some Western governments are paying attention. The UK, Denmark, and the Netherlands maintain diplomatic offices in Hargeisa.
Of course, you have the Republic of Somaliland, which is the only democratic country in the area that's valiantly trying to fight these terrorist threats.
The US Congress has begun holding hearings on Somaliland's strategic importance, particularly its role in counterterrorism and maritime security.
Tell us a bit about how the United States should be assisting and strengthening partners like Somaliland to counter China.
And we do have extensive engagement with Somaliland.
And in 2025, reports have emerged that Donald Trump's team is considering formal recognition of Somaliland, possibly in exchange for a US military presence in Berbera.
There is one oasis of stability, and that is Somaliland, which is a de facto independent area from Somalia.
Somaliland's president has described recognition as closer than ever. If true, it would mark a historic shift in US foreign policy, breaking with the decades-long One Somalia doctrine.
Experts say that leading it could be none other than US President Donald Trump. Reports say that recent US overtures have been encouraging for Somaliland.
So while no flag flies for Somaliland at the UN, its ports, partners and pipelines tell a very different story. Somaliland is already acting like a sovereign state. The world just refuses to call it one. But why does the world stubbornly refuse to call Somaliland a state? The African Union often cites a guiding principle. Don't redraw colonial-era borders. It fears that recognizing Somaliland could open the floodgates. If Somaliland breaks away, what about Biafra in Nigeria? What about Tigray in Ethiopia? Or Cabinda in Angola? But this principle isn't applied consistently. In 2011, the African Union welcomed South Sudan as a new member state, even though it too broke away from a larger country. The difference? South Sudan had the support of major powers and a negotiated agreement. Somaliland, despite its stability and self-governance, doesn't have a powerful backer. Meanwhile, Somalia vehemently opposes Somaliland's independence for both symbolic and political reasons. Accepting Somaliland's separation would be seen as legitimizing Somalia's fragmentation, and Mogadishu has used its international leverage to block Somaliland's diplomatic efforts. As for the wider world, unfortunately for Somaliland, the world is simply too busy with other matters. Over 3 decades, Somaliland has done more to build peace, democracy and stability than many nations that already have a seat at the UN. So why should Western countries recognize Somaliland? Firstly, because Somaliland is a rare democratic ally in a region plagued by authoritarianism, insurgency and instability. While neighboring Somalia remains fragile and dependent on international forces, Somaliland has held multiple free and fair elections, including peaceful transfers of power. Secondly, recognition would support regional stability. A secure, internationally engaged Somaliland could serve as a buffer against piracy, terrorism, and geopolitical influence from China, Russia, and Iran. Thirdly, Somaliland is a counter-terrorism partner in waiting. It borders a region affected by Al-Shabaab and other extremist groups, yet it has remained remarkably secure. Recognizing Somaliland would allow deeper military and intelligence cooperation without going through Mogadishu, a government that struggles to control even its own capital. Fourth, there's a moral argument. Recognition would send a powerful message that self-determination through peace and democracy is rewarded, not ignored. Somaliland didn't rise from the ashes of war with foreign aid packages or outside intervention. It did it through clan-based reconciliation, constitutional reform, and the long, difficult work of state building. And finally, because the West has often said it values sovereignty, democracy, and earned legitimacy, recognition in Somaliland's case is not a reward, it's simply a reflection of reality. And the reality is this: Somaliland exists. It is a functioning nation with borders, laws, leaders, and a people who know exactly who they are. Maybe it's time the world accepted it as such.